What if a terrified servant stumbled into the Queen's chamber one morning and saw something that should have been impossible? England's most powerful woman holding a razor to her face, scraping away evidence of something that could have destroyed her reign. That servant disappeared from court within hours, sent away with enough money to stay silent, and enough threats to ensure she never spoke. For over 400 years, the truth about what she witnessed has remained buried. But the evidence of Elizabeth's morning ritual keeps surfacing in places the establishment can't erase. Picture this. The year is 1570, and a young lady-in-waiting named Margaret Thornbury makes a mistake that will haunt her forever. She enters Queen Elizabeth's private chamber at dawn without waiting for permission, carrying fresh linens as she'd been instructed the night before. The heavy oak door swings open silently, and in the dim candlelight filtering through the chamber's narrow windows, she sees something that makes her blood freeze. Elizabeth I sits at her vanity table, her back partially turned, holding what appears to be a straight razor. Her face is completely bare, stripped of the elaborate white makeup that she never appears without in public. And she's methodically scraping the razor across her chin and jaw in slow, deliberate strokes. The sound is unmistakable, that distinctive scratching noise of a blade removing coarse hair from skin. Margaret stands paralyzed in the doorway, unable to move or speak, her mind struggling to process what her eyes are seeing. The Queen's hand pauses mid-stroke, and then Elizabeth's eyes meet Margaret's in the mirror's reflection. For 3 heartbeats, neither woman moves. The expression on Elizabeth's bare face is not anger, not surprise, but something far more terrifying. Cold, calculated assessment. She's deciding what to do about this witness. Margaret finally finds her voice and begins stammering an apology, but Elizabeth simply raises one pale hand for silence. The Queen's voice when she finally speaks is unnaturally calm, almost gentle, which somehow makes it more frightening. She tells Margaret to leave the linens and go, speaking as if nothing unusual has occurred, as if she hadn't just been caught performing a ritual that no woman, let alone a queen, should need to perform. Within 3 hours of that dawn encounter, Margaret Thornbury's entire life changes forever. She's summoned to meet with William Cecil, Elizabeth's most trusted advisor and the man who handles the crown's most sensitive problems. He doesn't waste time with pleasantries or explanations. Margaret is informed that she's being sent to a remote estate in the Scottish Highlands, effective immediately. She'll receive a generous annual pension, enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life without ever needing to work or marry. The estate is beautiful, Cecil assures her, with sweeping views and all the comforts she could desire. But the unspoken message is crystal clear in his cold gray eyes. This is exile, not a gift. Margaret is also given explicit instructions that are delivered with such quiet menace that she never forgets the exact wording. She is never to speak of what she saw that morning, not to family, not to friends, not even in her private prayers. If she values her life and the lives of her family members still at court, she will forget that morning ever happened. Cecil doesn't threaten her directly, he doesn't need to. Everyone at court knows what happens to people who know too much about the Queen's private life. They disappear into distant estates, into convents, into unmarked graves. Margaret leaves London that same afternoon, her belongings hastily packed, without even saying goodbye to her sister, who also serves at court. She spends the next 42 years in that Scottish estate, never once returning to London, never writing about what she witnessed, taking the secret to her grave in 1612. But before she died, she told her daughter one cryptic thing. The Virgin Queen was not what England believed her to be. The speed of Margaret's removal should tell you everything about how seriously Elizabeth's inner circle took this breach of privacy. This wasn't just about a servant seeing the Queen without makeup, something that would have been unusual but not catastrophic. This was about Margaret witnessing a daily ritual that revealed something fundamental about Elizabeth's biology, something that contradicted the entire public image of the Virgin Queen. Think about the logistics of what happened that morning. Within 3 hours, Cecil had been informed, a decision had been made about Margaret's fate, arrangements had been completed for her permanent relocation to Scotland, financial provisions had been established, and she was physically removed from London. That level of rapid, coordinated response suggests a pre-existing plan, as if Elizabeth's advisors had already discussed what to do if someone ever witnessed the morning ritual. They weren't improvising, they were executing a contingency protocol. Margaret wasn't the first servant to see too much, and she wouldn't be the last. But her case is one of the few we have documentation for, preserved in Cecil's private papers that weren't discovered until the 19th century. The question that historians have wrestled with ever since is obvious. What exactly did Margaret see that morning that required such immediate and permanent silencing? Was it just facial hair? Something that could potentially be explained as a medical condition? Or was it something more, something that confirmed rumors that had been circulating about Elizabeth since her childhood? Foreign ambassadors stationed at the English court were trained observers, intelligence agents whose job required them to assess every detail about the monarchs they dealt with, and they kept sending the same confused reports home about Elizabeth I. There was something distinctly masculine about her facial features that didn't match what they expected from a female ruler. The Venetian ambassador Giovanni Michiel wrote in an encrypted dispatch from 1557 that Elizabeth possessed what he carefully described as a shadow upon her upper lip that was visible even through the thick white makeup she wore. He noted this wasn't the soft down that some women develop, but something darker and coarser that created a visible line above her mouth. Michiel had observed queens and princesses across every court in Europe, from Madrid to Vienna to Paris. He knew exactly what royal women looked like, how they presented themselves, what was normal and what wasn't. His report wasn't cruel or mocking. It was genuinely puzzled. The observation of a professional spy who couldn't quite make sense of what he was seeing. He even noted that the queen seemed acutely aware of this feature, frequently touching her upper lip during conversations as if checking that her makeup remained in place. Other ambassadors made similar observations, using carefully coded language in their dispatches home. The French envoy wrote about coarse facial hair that required constant attention, noting that Elizabeth's ladies were frequently seen applying additional makeup to her face throughout the day, something no other queen required. The Spanish intelligence network was the most sophisticated in Europe, with agents embedded throughout the English court who reported everything they observed about Elizabeth's habits, health, and physical characteristics. Their files, now preserved in Spanish archives, contain multiple references to what they called the Queen's masculine facial characteristics. One agent reported that during a close audience where he stood near enough to observe her carefully, he could see evidence of dark stubble beneath her makeup that became more visible as the day progressed, and her face grew shiny from the heat of the court. He wrote that by evening audiences, the Queen's jaw and chin showed a faint shadow that no amount of white CERUSE could completely hide. This wasn't imagination or political propaganda. Spanish intelligence had no reason to fabricate physical details about Elizabeth's appearance. If anything, they would have preferred to report that the queen of their enemy nation was old, ugly, or diseased, standard insults that would please their king. Instead, they were reporting something far stranger. Specific, consistent observations about masculine physical traits that their agents couldn't explain. The Spanish ambassador himself, Count de Feria, wrote one line in a letter to Philip II that got him immediately recalled to Madrid. Her Majesty's face requires more grooming than is natural for a woman. Think about that phrasing carefully. He didn't say more makeup or more powder. He said more grooming, the same word used for beards and masculine facial hair maintenance. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from the portraits themselves, if you know what to look for. Elizabeth famously controlled her image obsessively, commissioning official portraits that showed her as eternally youthful and feminine, destroying paintings that didn't meet her standards. Yet even in these carefully constructed images, if you study portraits that were done from life rather than idealized fantasies, you can see hints of what artists tried to minimize but couldn't completely erase. The famous rainbow portrait shows Elizabeth's face in elaborate detail, and art historians have noted for decades that there's an unusual darkness around her upper lip and chin that doesn't match the painting's overall style. Some have dismissed this as deteriorating paint or poor restoration, but other details in the same painting remain perfectly clear. The Ditchley portrait, painted in 1592, shows similar shadowing around the lower face that multiple conservators have examined and confirmed is original to the painting, not later damage. Artists in the 16th century worked directly from life, spending hours observing their subjects. They would have seen Elizabeth's bare face during preparation sessions, seen what lay beneath the makeup, and despite their instructions to paint an idealized version, despite knowing their careers depended on pleasing the Queen, some of them couldn't resist including subtle hints of what they actually observed. These weren't mistakes or accidents. These were artists leaving a historical record, knowing that future generations might study their work and wonder why England's Virgin Queen had physical characteristics that didn't quite match her gender. When Elizabeth was just 25 years old, already queen for 2 years, she began a daily ritual that would continue for the next 4 decades, painting her entire face with a toxic mixture called Venetian CERUSE. This was white lead mixed with vinegar, creating a thick paste that produced a perfect porcelain complexion when applied. But here's what makes no sense about this timeline. 25 was extraordinarily young to begin such an extreme beauty regimen. Most noblewomen of the Tudor era wore minimal makeup until their 30s or 40s, when age and sun damage made cosmetics necessary. Elizabeth started poisoning her face when she was young, beautiful, and had no wrinkles or blemishes to hide. The official historical explanation has always been that she wanted to achieve the pale complexion that Tudor beauty standards demanded, that she was vain about her appearance and willing to endure discomfort for beauty. But this explanation falls apart under examination. The CERUSE wasn't just uncomfortable, it was agonizing. The mixture burned when applied, creating a sensation that witnesses described as fire on the skin. It ate away at the flesh underneath, creating open sores and permanent scarring. Long-term use led to hair loss, tooth decay, and eventual lead poisoning that caused tremors, memory loss, and organ damage. Elizabeth knew all of this. She was highly educated, fluent in multiple languages, and expert on science and medicine for her era. She understood exactly what she was doing to her body. So why would an intelligent, beautiful young queen voluntarily begin a process that would slowly poison and disfigure her over decades? The answer becomes clear when you understand what the CERUSE actually accomplished beyond creating pale skin. The thick white paste didn't just lighten complexion, it filled in and concealed texture. When applied heavily enough, it could smooth over anything: wrinkles, scars, pockmarks, or stubble. The CERUSE created an artificial surface that completely obscured what lay beneath it. By her 30s, Elizabeth was applying the mixture so thickly that witnesses reported her face looked like a painted mask rather than human skin. The Spanish ambassador wrote that her face appeared to be made of white wax, perfectly smooth and entirely unnatural. French visitors noted that you couldn't see any expression on her face because the makeup was too thick for her skin to move naturally underneath it. This wasn't normal cosmetic use, this was architectural reconstruction of her entire face. Each morning, Elizabeth would sit for hours while her ladies applied layer after layer of the white lead paste, building up a facade that bore little resemblance to her actual features. And this had to be done every single day because the CERUSE would crack and peel as her face moved, revealing what lay beneath. By evening, after a full day of audiences and meetings, witnesses reported seeing dark patches showing through where the makeup had worn away, particularly around her jaw and chin. The long-term effects of the Venetian CERUSE should have convinced Elizabeth to stop using it, but she never did. By her 40s, her skin was permanently damaged, covered in sores and lesions from decades of lead exposure. Contemporary accounts describe her face as scarred and pitted beneath the makeup, eaten away by the chemicals she applied daily. She developed a constant tremor in her hands from lead poisoning. Her teeth turned black and began falling out. She suffered from severe headaches and periods of confusion. Yet she continued the ritual every single morning, applying more and more CERUSE to hide the damage that previous applications had caused. This suggests the makeup wasn't optional for Elizabeth. She wasn't choosing beauty over health, she was choosing concealment over revelation. Whatever she was hiding beneath that white mask was more important than her physical well-being, more important than the pain of application, more important than the slow poisoning that was eventually killing her. The CERUSE allowed her to construct a false face, one that looked feminine and smooth and bore no trace of the masculine characteristics that her bare skin revealed, and she was willing to destroy her health completely to maintain that illusion. But the makeup alone wasn't enough to maintain the deception. Elizabeth needed professional help, someone with specific skills that went beyond cosmetic application. She needed someone who knew how to shave. Court records from Elizabeth's reign show regular payments to a man named Peter Lowe, whose official title was barber-surgeon to Her Majesty. Now, this might sound unremarkable until you understand what barber surgeons actually did in the 16th century, and why having one on daily retainer was highly unusual for a female monarch. Barber surgeons were medical practitioners who specialized in two primary skills: bloodletting and shaving. They maintained beards, trimmed hair, and performed various grooming services for male nobility. Queens and princesses employed ladies-in-waiting for cosmetic help, not barber surgeons. Yet Elizabeth paid Peter Lowe a substantial annual salary and granted him exclusive access to her private chambers every single morning before dawn. The timing is what makes this arrangement so suspicious. Lowe would arrive at the palace while it was still dark, before Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting were permitted near her, before anyone else was allowed in her presence. He would spend anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour alone with her in her private chamber, and then leave before the regular morning routine began. Court gossip at the time questioned what exactly a barber surgeon was doing during these early morning visits. The official explanation recorded in payment ledgers was that he was attending to the Queen's complexion, helping with medical skin treatments and cosmetic preparations. But this explanation raises more questions than it answers. If Peter Lowe was simply helping with cosmetics, why did he need to be there before dawn when Elizabeth's own ladies could have handled that work? Why did he require complete privacy, with guards stationed outside to ensure no one entered during his visits? And most tellingly, why was he a barber surgeon specifically, rather than a cosmetics expert or physician? The only logical answer is that Lowe was performing a service that required his particular professional skills that involved sharp blades and the removal of unwanted hair. He was shaving the Queen's face every morning, carefully removing the stubble that grew overnight, preparing her skin so the ladies-in-waiting could apply the CERUSE without anyone noticing what had to be shaved away first. Peter Lowe maintained this position for 15 years from 1562 to 1577, visiting Elizabeth's chamber every morning without fail. During that entire time, he never spoke publicly about what his duties entailed, never gossiped with other court servants, never wrote memoirs or kept detailed records. He took whatever he knew about the Queen's morning routine to his grave. But here's where this story takes a sinister turn. Peter Lowe died suddenly in 1577 at the age of 43, an age when most men were still healthy and productive. The cause of death was recorded simply as fever, that convenient catch-all diagnosis that meant nothing and covered everything. His death came just weeks after a new assistant had been assigned to learn his duties, presumably so someone could take over the delicate morning routine. That assistant, whose name appears in court records as Thomas Bradshaw, died less than a month after Peter Lowe, before he could establish himself in the position. His death was recorded as sudden death, with no additional details provided. Then Elizabeth went through 3 more barber surgeons in rapid succession over the next 18 months. Each one served for a few weeks or months, then either died unexpectedly or disappeared from court records entirely. One was listed as dying from apoplexy. Another supposedly fell from his horse and broke his neck. The third simply vanished from all documentation, as if he had never existed. By 1579, Elizabeth apparently gave up on finding a single trusted barber surgeon and instead rotated through different practitioners, never using the same one for more than a few weeks at a time. This limited how much any individual could observe about her morning routine and reduced the risk that someone might piece together the full truth. But it also meant she was constantly breaking in new people, teaching them what needed to be done, trusting them with her most dangerous secret. Each new barber surgeon represented a potential security breach, someone who might talk or write or tell their family what they'd witnessed in the Queen's private chamber. The mortality rate among people who served this function suggests Elizabeth's advisors took extreme measures to ensure silence. If you accepted the position of barber surgeon to the Queen, you were signing your own death warrant the moment you outlived your usefulness. In 1582, something happened that nearly exposed Elizabeth's morning secret to the entire court. A young lady-in-waiting named Catherine Grey, distantly related to the powerful Grey family, wrote a letter to her sister describing what she had witnessed over several months of serving close to the Queen. We don't have the original letter because it was intercepted before it could be delivered, read by members of the Privy Council, and then destroyed. But we know about its contents because Catherine's sister, in a response to an earlier letter, referenced receiving Catherine's disturbing account of the Queen's toilet. That phrase, the Queen's toilet, referred to the morning ritual of grooming and dressing that every noblewoman performed. The sister's letter, which survived in family archives and wasn't discovered until the 19th century, contains one devastating line. What you describe about Her Majesty's morning ministrations is indeed strange and contrary to nature, but you must never speak of this again, even to me, for both our sakes. Think about what that sentence reveals. Catherine had described something about Elizabeth's morning routine that her sister recognized as strange and contrary to nature. Not just unusual or surprising, but contrary to nature, suggesting something that violated basic expectations about female biology. The sister was frightened enough by this information that she begged Catherine never to mention it again, not even in private correspondence between sisters. But the real mystery is what happened to Catherine Grey herself after that intercepted letter. Court records show she was present and active in Elizabeth's service throughout 1582, attending various functions and appearing in household accounts receiving her regular wages. Then, in early 1583, her name simply disappears from every single document. She's not listed as leaving court service, not married off to some distant lord, not sent to a convent, not returned to her family estate. She just ceases to exist in the historical record. Genealogical research into the Grey family shows that Catherine had been born in 1562, making her only 20 years old when she vanished. She should have had decades of life ahead of her, yet there's no death record, no burial site, no memorial, nothing. Her sister never mentioned her again in any surviving correspondence, which is itself strange. Sisters in noble families typically wrote to each other constantly, discussing marriages, children, court gossip, and family matters. The complete silence about Catherine suggests the sister was terrified into never speaking her name again. What could cause such total erasure of a person from history? The only logical explanation is that Catherine Grey witnessed something during those morning ministrations that confirmed the rumors about Elizabeth's biological nature. Perhaps she saw the Queen being shaved, saw the barber surgeon at work, saw the stubble that grew overnight. Or perhaps she saw something even more revealing, something that explained why Elizabeth needed daily shaving in the first place. Whatever Catherine witnessed and wrote about in that intercepted letter, it was dangerous enough that the Privy Council decided she couldn't be allowed to exist anymore. She was erased, not just exiled, but removed from history itself, as if she had never been born. The efficiency and completeness of that erasure tells you how seriously Elizabeth's inner circle took any threat to her secret. They had the power, the resources, and the ruthlessness to make people disappear without a trace. And they used that power whenever someone learned too much about what the Virgin Queen was hiding beneath her layers of costume and cosmetics. Catherine Grey's fate serves as a chilling reminder that we're not just talking about historical curiosity or academic speculation. We're talking about a secret that people died to protect, a truth so dangerous that the English establishment was willing to commit murder to keep it buried. That letter Catherine wrote, the one that got her erased from existence, described exactly what this video is uncovering. Evidence that Elizabeth I required daily shaving because she was biologically male or intersex, living as a woman through an elaborate combination of makeup, costume, and violence against anyone who threatened to reveal the truth. December 1597 was one of the coldest winters England had experienced in decades. And at Richmond Palace, 64-year-old Elizabeth I fell seriously ill with what court physicians diagnosed as a severe respiratory infection. She developed a high fever, violent coughing fits, and became so weak that she could barely stand without assistance. For 3 days, she was too sick to perform her usual morning ritual, too exhausted to sit upright while her ladies applied the layers of Venetian CERUSE that she never appeared without. For the first time in over 3 decades, members of her court saw the Queen's face in its natural state, without the white lead mask that had become her trademark. And what they saw shocked them so profoundly that multiple courtiers wrote about it in their private journals and letters. Lord Henry Howard, who had been granted access to check on the Queen's condition, wrote that the Queen's face in its natural state was most surprising and not as expected in a woman of her years. That careful phrasing reveals everything. He wasn't surprised by wrinkles or age. He was surprised by something that wasn't expected in a woman at all. Another courtier, whose diary entry was discovered in the 20th century, noted unusual dark growth upon her chin and upper lip that created a most masculine aspect when observed without her customary cosmetics. A Spanish diplomatic spy, always watching for any weakness or scandal in the English court, sent an encrypted message back to Madrid that was even more explicit. He wrote that the Queen appeared more man than woman without her artifice, and that the resemblance to her father, King Henry VIII, was striking and disturbing. Think about what that means. Henry VIII was famous for his powerful, masculine appearance, his broad face, and strong features. The spy was saying that without makeup, Elizabeth looked like her father in ways that went beyond normal family resemblance. The implications of these observations are devastating when you consider them together. These weren't enemies trying to insult Elizabeth or political opponents spreading propaganda. These were neutral observers, some even sympathetic to her, who were genuinely shocked by what they saw when her face was bare. They all noted the same things: dark facial hair, masculine features, an appearance that contradicted expectations about female biology. As soon as Elizabeth recovered enough strength to think clearly, her first order wasn't about affairs of state or foreign policy. Her first command was to seal herself in her private chambers with her most trusted ladies-in-waiting and whatever barber surgeon was currently in her service. She spent 2 full days behind locked doors being, as court records delicately phrased it, restored to proper appearance before allowing anyone else to see her. 2 days. Think about what requires 2 full days of grooming work to accomplish. Normal cosmetic application, even the elaborate CERUSE process, took a few hours at most. What was happening during those 2 days that took so long and required such absolute privacy? The obvious answer is that 40 years of facial hair had been allowed to grow for 3 days without shaving. And it took extensive work to remove it all and repair the skin damage underneath before the makeup could be reapplied. Elizabeth emerged from those 2 days of seclusion looking like her usual self again, face painted white, features smooth and carefully composed. But everyone who had seen her during those 3 sick days now carried knowledge that changed how they understood their queen. Some became more loyal, recognizing the extraordinary burden she carried and the length she went to maintain her rule despite her biology. Others became nervous, realizing they knew something that could get them killed if they spoke about it. Several of the courtiers who witnessed Elizabeth without makeup during those 3 days died within the next 2 years under circumstances that were never adequately explained. One was found dead in his chambers from what was called natural causes, despite being only 42 years old. Another died in a riding accident that witnesses said looked more like murder than an accident. The Spanish spy who sent that encrypted message about Elizabeth looking more man than woman was recalled to Madrid and never given another diplomatic posting. The pattern was clear. Seeing the Queen's bare face was dangerous to your health. Now we need to talk about something that historians have danced around for centuries, too uncomfortable or too afraid to state directly. The morning shaving ritual isn't an isolated mystery that stands alone. It's part of a larger pattern of evidence that all points toward the same shocking conclusion. Elizabeth I was either born intersex, was transgender, or was actually the Bisley boy, a male child who replaced the real princess in 1544. Every strange element of her life suddenly makes perfect sense when viewed through this lens. The daily visits from barber-surgeons before dawn? They were shaving her face. The toxic Venetian CERUSE applied in layers so thick, her face looked like a mask. It was hiding stubble and masculine facial features. Her refusal to marry any of the dozens of princes and kings who proposed to her over 44 years. Any husband would have discovered her secret on the wedding night. Her absolute prohibition against anyone examining her body after death. She knew an autopsy would reveal the truth. The unprecedented speed with which they sealed her corpse in a lead coffin. Her inner circle was protecting a secret that would have destroyed the legitimacy of her entire reign. Her unusual height, her powerful hands, her stride that ambassadors noted was more like a soldier than a lady. All explained if she was biologically male. The Venetian ambassador's observation about her shadow upon her upper lip, the French envoy's note about coarse facial hair, the Spanish intelligence reports about masculine characteristics, they were all documenting the same thing. Facial hair that no amount of makeup could completely conceal. The famous Tilbury speech where she declared, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." That was a confession hidden in plain sight, acknowledging a body that didn't match her gender while claiming the masculine authority she actually possessed. Every single piece of evidence that has confused historians for 400 years suddenly slots into place like a puzzle being solved. The secret that Margaret Thornbury witnessed when she walked in on Elizabeth with a razor, the disturbing account that Catherine Grey wrote about in her letter, the shocking appearance that courtiers observed when Elizabeth was too sick to maintain her disguise, they were all witnessing the same truth. England's greatest monarch, the Virgin Queen who shaped an empire and defined an age, was living as the wrong gender. Or more accurately, was living as a woman despite being biologically male or intersex. And this wasn't just a personal secret. This was a state secret that required a massive conspiracy to maintain. Think about how many people must have known or suspected the truth. The barber surgeons who shaved her face every morning, the ladies-in-waiting who helped dress her and saw her body during illness, the physicians who examined her during medical crises, the advisors who made contingency plans for what to do if someone witnessed too much, the servants who prepared her body for burial and sealed the coffin with such suspicious speed, the guards who kept witnesses away from her death chamber. All of these people carried the knowledge, and the English establishment used money, threats, exile, and murder to ensure their silence. This wasn't just Elizabeth's personal conspiracy. This was the collective secret of the entire Tudor power structure. People who understood that revealing the truth would trigger a political crisis that could destroy England. If Elizabeth was exposed as biologically male, every decision she made would be questioned. Every law she passed would be invalid. Every treaty she signed would be open to challenge. Catholic powers who wanted to restore Catholicism to England would have the perfect excuse to invade. The Protestant Reformation in England would be delegitimized. The entire Elizabethan age, one of the greatest periods in English history, would be rewritten as a fraud. So they protected her secret with everything they had, and they've continued protecting it for over 400 years since her death. Here's what makes this entire situation even more frustrating. We could prove or disprove everything about Elizabeth's biological sex in less than 24 hours using modern technology. We don't even need to open her coffin or disturb her remains. Ground-penetrating radar and computed tomography scanning can examine what's inside a sealed lead coffin without touching it. We can see bone structure, estimate height, examine skeletal characteristics that reveal biological sex with extraordinary accuracy. DNA analysis techniques developed in the last decade can extract genetic material from microscopic particles without disturbing remains. We could determine chromosomal sex, test for intersex conditions, even reconstruct what Elizabeth actually looked like beneath the makeup and costumes. The technology exists. The scientific expertise exists. Major universities have offered to perform the analysis for free, guaranteeing absolute discretion and minimal invasiveness. Yet every single request to examine Elizabeth's tomb has been denied by the British establishment. In 2003, on the 400th anniversary of her death, a coalition of historians and scientists submitted a formal proposal to conduct non-invasive scanning of her coffin using the latest technology. They promised to handle everything with complete respect and sensitivity. They offered to keep results confidential if anything controversial was discovered. The proposal was reviewed and rejected within 2 weeks. In 2016, after DNA technology successfully identified Richard III's remains discovered under a parking lot and revealed intimate details about medieval royalty, researchers tried again with Elizabeth. They specifically noted that the same techniques used on Richard could be applied to Elizabeth without opening her tomb, using only microscopic samples of dust or fabric from around the coffin. Again denied. The official reason given is always the same: respect for the dead and the sanctity of her final resting place. But this justification is absurdly hypocritical when you examine what they've allowed with other royal remains. They opened Henry VII's tomb for examination. They exhumed and studied medieval kings. They dug up Richard III from under a parking lot and subjected his skeleton to comprehensive DNA testing, facial reconstruction, and full-body CT scanning. They've allowed non-invasive studies of Egyptian pharaohs, ancient nobility, and countless other historical figures. But not Elizabeth. Never Elizabeth. Her tomb at Westminster Abbey has remained inviolate since 1606, when King James I moved her body to share a tomb with her half-sister Mary I. And here's what makes James's behavior particularly suspicious. He had every political reason to diminish Elizabeth's legacy. She had imprisoned and executed his mother, Mary, Queen of Scots. He represented a rival claim to the throne. Yet instead of allowing any examination that might expose problems with Elizabeth's legitimacy, James became the most zealous protector of her tomb. Why would James protect the reputation of a woman who killed his mother unless someone told him a secret that made him understand why Elizabeth's remains could never be examined? The logical answer is that during the transition of power, someone from Elizabeth's inner circle confided the truth to James, explaining exactly why the coffin had been sealed so quickly and why it must remain sealed forever. James understood that exposing Elizabeth's secret would delegitimize not just her reign, but the entire Protestant succession that he inherited. If Elizabeth was revealed as biologically male, questions would be raised about his own legitimacy as her successor. So he became part of the conspiracy, protecting a secret that was now his problem to maintain. And that conspiracy of silence has continued through every British monarch since, through every government administration, through centuries of historical scholarship. The British establishment has decided, collectively and consistently, that whatever truth lies in Elizabeth's sealed coffin is too dangerous to reveal. They've had 400 years to come up with a reasonable explanation for why her tomb alone must remain unexamined. They haven't provided one because there isn't one. The only logical reason to prevent scientific examination of her remains is that they already know or strongly suspect what those tests would reveal. And they've determined that protecting the myth of the Virgin Queen is more important than historical truth. The woman who shaved her face every morning like a man, who painted her face with poison to hide masculine features, who refused to marry because any husband would discover her secret, lies in a sealed tomb that the British government has protected more carefully than any other historical site in the nation. What are they still hiding after all these centuries? The answer is probably exactly what you think it is. If you want to see more videos exposing historical secrets that governments have buried for centuries, hit that subscribe button right now. These stories don't tell themselves, and this channel is one of the few places investigating what really happened behind the official versions of history. Drop a comment below telling me what other historical figures you think might have hidden similar secrets. Your suggestions shape what we investigate next. And smash that like button if you believe it's finally time for Westminster Abbey to allow DNA testing on Elizabeth's remains. Every like tells me you want more content like this, more uncomfortable truths that challenge everything you learned in school. The establishment has protected this secret for 400 years. Let's make enough noise that they can't ignore the demand for answers anymore.